decades, and we have the library board has requested increased funding for VIRL, Vancouver Island Regional Library System, consistently for the last, well, since I've been on the board, which is, I don't know, 5 years now. So definitely necessary. Libraries are key community services, safe places, gathering places, and places to get books. And they are in desperate need of more funding. And I did check to see whether the ABICC resolutions were out, but I don't. They're not. The resolutions aren't out yet, and I'm not aware that anyone has put one through from ABICC. So hopefully this will make it to BCM and we can all jump in there.
There is a motion there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when I was on the library board, which must have been 6, 7, or 8 years ago, since it was
Before you, I was there. We were talking about it, and
So I'll move that council request the province Ministry of Municipal Affairs increase its public library funding to address regulatory requirements as well as offsetting the inflation increases causing around.
second. All in favor? Carried. Report that council received the Comox Valley Regional District proposed Regional Park Service background study and proposed service framework report.
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Carried.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So, as you'll recall, I believe it was January 2021 was the first time this topic came forward to you guys. And at that time, you directed staff to participate in a group to develop this background study. So that's what's in front of Council tonight, and should you be interested in hearing more, Mark and his team will deliver a presentation on the content of that report. But just to confirm what tonight's all about is this is about understanding what a regional park service could look like, and should the CVRD board move to establish this, Cumberland would then have the council would have an opportunity to, at a later date, make a decision whether Cumberland is to participate in it. So this is about information gathering and an opportunity for folks to provide feedback to the board to inform their decisions. So endorse the motion to accept the presentation, please.
I move that council receive a presentation from Mark Meredith, CVRD Manager Parks and CVRD Project Consultant
established in different regional districts, particularly in high growth areas. It's a piece that looks at who's doing what around the province in terms of regional park services and what we can learn from those services. And then finally, what a regional park service in the Comox Valley could look like. Ultimately, the purpose or the value we hope of the study is to help the 4 local governments of the Comox Valley Regional District, so our 3 municipalities and the regional district, which is, of course, the local government for the electoral areas, help those 4 local governments make an informed decision on the service. Not necessarily on whether to create a service, that's something that the individual local governments will determine on their own and whether to participate, but more if the decision is made to create a service, what could that look like? What perhaps should that look like? What considerations might the local governments want to take into account? It's also then to advise on the design of the service framework, so the various elements, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And that's it, kind of present that research piece then for information and for consideration by the local governments. It's divided into a number of different chapters, as you'll know from seeing it in the package, and it starts off by introducing and really defining regional parks. It talks about some of the key characteristics of regional parks, and it tries to distinguish them from other types of parks that we all know about. The local parks, Cumberland's got a vast system of local parks of all different kinds. In fact, in your system, you're the only jurisdiction in the area that has in its typology of parks an actual category called regional parks. And so, which is kind of neat because those parks certainly do have some features of what we would consider regional parks, because those features, those characteristics of regional parks tend to be things like they exist really to protect nature, first and foremost to protect nature. Regionally significant ecosystems, as Mark talked about a moment ago. They exist to connect people to nature. So how do we get residents into nature, to connect with nature, to enjoy nature? Another characteristic is that they exist really to help people become active in nature. So we see horseback riding, hiking, biking, those kinds of activities, low impact on the environment, but a sense of being active in nature. And finally, to connect parks and people. So, and that's typically through our greenways. So we have not only regional parks in terms of kind of broad areas built around regionally significant landscapes and features, but also then the greenways that connect those parks together and connect communities together. The study talks about the benefits and the reasons to create regional parks, and we look in there at the sustainable growth idea, which we see really espoused in the regional growth strategy and also in the official community plans of the municipalities. And those regional growth and the notion of kind of compact communities and large protected natural areas as being really fundamental to sustainable growth. We look at ecosystem services, another reason for and another benefit of regional parks, another reason for creating regional parks. Protecting biodiversity, improved physical and mental health. And some of you may recall that just a couple of weeks ago, actually, Parks Canada came out with a program where they are now registering mental health experts to offer prescriptions to individuals, to clients, to actually get access to nature because of the benefits to mental health. And we see that played out in all regional park systems, very important. Social connection, how do we get people together interacting not only with nature, but in nature interacting with one another. Cultural recognition and protection, and so particularly as it relates to First Nations. And then finally, there is an economic development and a tourism angle to regional parks, a benefit of regional parks related to that, and another reason for promoting them and providing them. So these parks tend to be destination parks, and where they exist in other regions, they do tend to bring people to the region. History of the regional parks in the Comox Valley, Mark talked about that, goes right back to 1971 when the first service was established, and that kind of evolved a little bit, and then in 1992 there would try to be a little bit more of an injection of vision into it, and there was a vision document created at that point. 98, the service unfortunately went dormant, but then since then there's been repeated initiatives, and Mark referred to a few, to really focus on protecting natural areas, and as a vehicle to do that, looking at regional parks. The background study talks about and profiles really the existing park systems that are in the local government. So we've got our electoral area park system, and those at the local community level, but we've also, of course, got one for each municipality, including the Village of Cumberland. And when we look at all of those different different parks, and we can get a sense of kind of the different kinds of parks and the reasons that those are promoted. And there's a tremendous variety of parks that are provided to residents of the individual jurisdictions. But when we look at all of those, one of the things that we realize is that there are some gaps actually in the system, particularly then at the interjurisdictional or that regional level where we have those larger parks. I know in Cumberland you've got some very large parks, your community forest, Cumberland Lake, and so forth. So you are kind of ahead of most, as it were. Although the electoral areas as well have Seal Bay, Goose Spit, and a number of other large, Seal Bay in particular being very large. So there are some examples out there, and each jurisdiction can point to a few examples of larger nature-related parks. But in general, we do see some gaps in the overall system that could use filling and could result in some added protection. And there's a shared sense when we talk to the working group that Mark referred to earlier, on which Kevin sat, and when we talk to the CAOs and we talk to other staff in all of the jurisdictions, there's a shared sense that there is a need for a regional system to address growth pressures. We are in one of the highest growth areas of the province and therefore of Canada. Land is only becoming scarcer and more expensive, and the sooner we act on that, the better. The crowded destination parks, Kevin spoke very eloquently about that in a lot of our working group meetings, where he said, when we look at Cumberland Lake, and we see the data to corroborate this point, when we look at Cumberland Lake, we're seeing a tremendous amount of activity. Wouldn't it be great if we had some other regional parks that could take some of the pressure off that existing park? We see the increased demand. We know from each of the jurisdictions, and indeed we know from looking outside of Cumberland, just the increased demand exacerbated by COVID, but not kind of only related to COVID, of that increased demand of people wanting to be outside in nature. We see greenways being important to connect parks together, to connect communities together, and to allow people to get out of their car, to do active transportation in those areas, and also as a form of recreation. So existing local parks and greenways profiled, we look at what investments have been made, what is in place. We look at the plans and strategies that are in place for expansion in every one of the systems, and we look at the need for collective action through some kind of regional service to fill those gaps I talked about. Your Worship, we also, in the background study, and this is a very important part because it refers to the element I noted earlier, which is who else is doing what and what can we learn from them. So we do profile 6 regional park services from other parts of the province, all high growth parts. So we look on Vancouver Island at the Capital Region, we look at the Cowichan Valley, and we look at the Nanaimo region. Each one of those regional districts has a very robust, in particular the CRD and the Nanaimo Regional District, robust regional park system that has evolved over time. We look at the Lower Mainland, Metro Vancouver, the Fraser Valley, and we look at the Central Okanagan in Kelowna, and Kelowna is beyond Kelowna, Central Okanagan Regional District, which includes Kelowna, West Kelowna, Peachland, and Lake Country. And some of the takeaways that we see from each of those, or from that collection of high growth areas and their regional park systems, is first of all a primary focus of the regional park systems in each place on ecosystem protection and access to nature. There are other objectives in each of the services, and there are other areas of focus, particularly on connecting people with nature, but really the primary focus is on protecting natural areas in each of those places. We see also a greenway focus, an additional focus in each of those places. That's viewed as being important. We see again, and I noted this earlier, a cultural heritage becoming more important as it relates to First Nations and how to involve First Nations in helping to steward the landscape and helping to operate regional parks in a way that really is sensitive to and celebrating of First Nations heritage on the landscape. We look at the strong demand and growing. So in each of these services, they're growing They continue to grow, they continue to acquire because they're trying to keep up with that demand for open space. And finally, full participation, which is very important because in all of the different areas, in all of these different areas, we've got full participation, all jurisdictions and all parts of jurisdictions. So, and that includes islands. So when we look at the Capital Regional District, the Cowichan Valley District, and Metro Vancouver, those are all, and in Nanaimo, I beg your pardon, those 4 areas all have islands as part of their different jurisdictions. Bowen Island's a municipality in Metro Vancouver. There's some other islands as well. In all the other areas, they have, as part of electoral areas, they have islands that are connected to electoral areas. And in each of those places, it's not only the mainland, as it were, if we count Vancouver Island as the mainland in this sense, but it's also the islands themselves. And that's really important because, of course, we have islands, Hornby and Denman. And so we want to ensure that we kind of take that into consideration. Funding for acquisitions. That was another takeaway when we look at those areas. Each of these areas recognizes that these systems are only as good as their ability to continue to acquire new sensitive ecosystems. And so they ensure that monies for acquisitions are put into reserve and kept there so they can't be used for other things. Acquisition methods, a variety of those methods used in each places, not just outright purchase, but land swaps, partnerships, rights of way, all those kinds of things. And that's really important here in the Comox Valley, where we don't have a lot of crown land, of course. Most of our land, most of our forested land is privately owned, so we look to partnerships in our future if we do create a regional park. And finally, the last takeaway from each of these areas, and this is relevant again to Comox Valley, is that in each regional park service, there are individual jurisdictions, and every jurisdiction can point to these, that have regional-like parks. So if we look at Metro Vancouver, we've got Burnaby Mountain, we've got Stanley Park, Surrey has a number of parks. So we look at the Capital Region, Saanich has a number. In my area, the Central Okanagan, Kelowna has a number of parks that have regional characteristics. And that's important because in each of these places, the local jurisdictions, the municipalities have decided, or in the electoral areas, have decided to retain their existing parks that have regional characteristics, retain those under local control, and build on those systems by expanding a regional park service and creating new parks. So it's not a matter of transferring responsibility necessarily, although that can happen. It hasn't happened in those other places, but it can happen. It's more, how do we add to what we already have? Your Worship, in the background study as well, we look then at a framework for a potential service here in the Comox Valley, and we focus on different building blocks that are identified with options explored under each building blocks. Every shared service, and we think of shared services primarily in a regional district context, and that's completely appropriate for this discussion here, but every shared service, irrespective of where it is, has a number of common elements. And there are 4 in particular. There's service definition, so what is the service that is being provided and what isn't being proposed. There's participation, which jurisdictions are going to participate and help govern and help pay for that service. There is governance, how do we collectively make decisions that everybody feels a meaningful role in towards and that everybody can live with. And then finally there's funding, how do we share costs, who pays how much, and so forth. We look at all of those in the document, and we got to that point by having a draft study presented by the working group to the chief administrative officers. So we had Clayton Postings, of course, from Cumberland, and all the other CAOs from the other jurisdictions meet on a number of occasions and go through the draft and think about how they felt a service could come together to present to the decision-making bodies, the governing bodies, to review and to consider and then eventually make a decision on. When we look at that service framework, we'll go through very briefly the 4 elements that I outlined already, beginning with definition. Picking up on not only our own discussions at the working group level and then with the CAOs, but also what we learned from other jurisdictions, is the focus primarily on protecting in perpetuity, which is really key, regionally significant natural areas, that being the main focus of this proposed service. Within that context of natural area protection, finding ways as well to provide opportunities for residents to connect to access, and to enjoy nature was also seen as important. An additional focus would be to then provide regional greenways, and those would be off-road linear parks with multi-use trails. They would be for people as opposed to flora and fauna. There would be four people, and part of that kind of active transportation system for the broader regional district. So it would connect to the various trails and greenways that exist in each of the municipalities and the regional district, the electoral areas, and they would also then connect the jurisdictions together. So that's kind of the definition then, that dual focus, with the primary one being on natural area protection, a secondary one being on greenway provision. Service participation, picking up again on what we learned in other places, but also the recognition that this service is very much a public good service. So regional parks really benefit everybody in the region, irrespective of proximity to them and irrespective of use of them. It is really just they have what's the term I'm looking for?
Inherent.
Thank you. Inherent, yeah, inherent value just in being, an innate value, if you will, just being. So all jurisdictions with the regional district and all parts of each jurisdiction we've suggested here, and as I noted, recognizes that broad public benefit of regional parks, and we also see, as I noted, it's a feature in all of the other regional systems we looked at. Intrinsic, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, that works too.
Thank you. We'll get it together at some point, yes. Service governance. This particular topic was the most challenging to come forward with some recommendations around. We wanted to develop something that was very practical, but we also wanted to develop something that took into account concerns voiced by some of the jurisdictions, at least by the staff of jurisdictions, that related to control over spending decisions, important spending decisions. It's particularly challenging, the service governance element, because regional park services are one of 4 types of regional services in British Columbia under the Local Government Act, from which a jurisdiction cannot withdraw once you decide to become a member. And that's because you're dealing with lands that are purchased and in perpetuity to provide that benefit. And so once you agree to be part of that system and purchase it and to maintain those, it's unfair to all the other jurisdictions if you decide you're going to leave. So regional districts, or regional park services, and others public transit. So these public good type services are things that that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the provincial government, has decided cannot be withdrawn from. They can be reviewed, and every jurisdiction has the statutory right to initiate a review of a service, but they can't be withdrawn from. So that raises the ante, as it were, when we talk about service governance, because we want to make sure everybody has their concerns met before they sign on the line, as it were, and we want to make sure that everybody feels good about contributing to this service on these spending decisions. So how do we do that? We have suggested in the document that we would create a regional park services committee to provide recommendations on all matters to the board. So in particular matters related to spending, the acquisition of lands and the development of service budgets. We would have a committee do that, and we would create a committee so that we could have a different membership of the committee and a different voting structure in the committee. The Local Government Act is very clear that the board on these types of services, on issues related to spending, is the final decision-making body for a regional service. The Act is also clear in saying that the decisions made by the board on spending, on acquisition of lands, on all financial matters, must be made in accordance with the corporate weighted voting model. And that model then kind of gives all jurisdictions a role at the table in making those decisions, and it assigns different votes by weights, if you will, hence the term corporate weighted, by population. And so right away we see the more populous jurisdictions would have or do have the larger say. And that's seen as very legitimate in most services, but in some services it's seen as problematic. And in a service such as regional parks, from which you can't withdraw, and around which we have concerns of other members about the degree of meaningful contribution or participation in decisions, we decided we would have a slightly different approach in order to deviate though from that weighted voting model, we need to look at a different body to make recommendations. So that's why we developed the committee. And we say we'll have a committee, and we've proposed 9 members of the committee, 1 member for every 10,000 population or portion thereof. And so we would see then Courtenay would have 3 members, Comox would have 2 members, Cumberland would have 1, and each of the electoral areas would have 1 member. And there has to be on all matters, we've suggested there be a 2/3 majority. So that 2/3 majority then would mean that for every decision on a recommendation, every recommendation to pass, you would need 6 of 9. And that means that no one member can veto a decision, no one member can make a decision on parts of the others, and that you've raised the bar so that any recommendation going forward to the board on spending money to acquire land, because it's the spending on money on land that drives all other financial decisions. So any decision on spending money to acquire land and any decision on a recommended budget for the service, and in fact any other decision we've said to make it simple, would have to meet that high bar of 6 of 9, a 2/3 supermajority. Now, all of this is great, except for the fact that you still have then the board that has to receive these recommendations and make the final decision. The board can, if it wishes, and we need to be very clear on this point, the board could, if it wished, say, thank you, committee, we hear your recommendation, we're taking a different route. And that's something that every jurisdiction needs to kind of ultimately accept, because those are the rules under which the board must operate. That said, we feel that particularly if we have a bylaw created for the committee, because committees don't need bylaws, but we could create a bylaw to make it very clear as to the rationale for the supermajority, for the membership of the committee, and have all jurisdictions of the regional district indicate through acceptance through the board, through the representatives of the regional district board, indicate that yes, they buy into this model, and that the board will accept that as recommendations come forward, they know that those recommendations have met a very high bar of support, that broad support for that recommendation coming forward. So we've tried to make it very easy for the board to be able to receive recommendations and say, we accept those recommendations as being the will of the broad majority of members. Service funding, Your Worship, is the final point. And on service funding, we have taken an approach here that until the service knows what exactly it's going to look like in terms of having done its strategic planning, and until the service has in place a land acquisition strategy, the service budget should be small. It should be enough to cover the initiatives that are required for strategic planning, for the development of a land acquisition strategy, and for some other staffing costs, but basically should start very small and grow incrementally in response to the wishes of the members through that 2/3 majority committee recommendation. So the funding model we suggested is to start at $275,000, and that would translate into just a little under $6 for a representative house in the Comox Valley. And again, incremental annual increases would be determined by committee recommendation, and they'd be informed by the strategic plan and the land acquisition strategy. Your Worship, we've noted that the Comox First Nation is clearly a very important potential partner in this service. We don't want to be presumptuous in terms of what role Comox First Nations would wish to play. We did want to state, however, that the parties would, and we know this because of the position that the regional district and each of the jurisdictions has taken on its own, we know that the local governments would be committed to consulting and, where possible, collaborating with Comox First Nations on a number of elements: the acquisition of lands, the operation of regional parks and trails, and the protection of important ecosystems. And we see that role for First Nations being embraced both by local governments and First Nations and a number of other systems. I was active in Metro Vancouver, and when we, just while I was there as a manager, we actually had an operating agreement in place with Tsleil-Waututh for one of our regional parks. And we were exploring other was the Squamish Nation, for example, for a different park. And so we're seeing these types of things becoming very important. Next steps, Your Worship. Mark referred to these a little bit, so I'll just go very briefly. The first step is the one we're doing this evening, and that is to get some feedback from the local governments on the study and the framework, and then that feedback will be used to inform a report going forward to the CVRD board. If the service is supported by the board, then the establishment process for the bylaw for a new service would be kicked into gear, and each local government would be asked to provide a letter of support. And then if the service were adopted by the board, the service would be funded starting in 2023. And that funding then, once received, would allow for strategic planning and the land acquisition strategy to be developed. And I will stop there, Your Worship, and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And we'll start with Councillor Brown.
Oh, thank you. Fantastic report.
Thank you.
Very thorough on all the pieces, the risk assessment, all of it. It was really long and really great.
It was long, yes.
So I appreciate the work that went into that and the collaboration as well. I have a couple of questions. I'm curious in terms of the funding, so the conversion assessment, you looked at two options with assessment and population and just assessment. And if you have any insight on how the population bit worked out, because I understand that Nanaimo's done that. So the impacts of that from an equity lens is what I'm trying to figure out.
Sure. Yes,
That's my
very
first.
good question. And through Your Worship, if I may, yes, the NIMO is the only one that does that hybrid approach, which looks at converted assessment and population. And I am to blame for that, because I was the consultant who did their review in 2018 and made that recommendation. And, you know, it's funny, there's that old saying that consistency is the sign of a weak mind or something like that. And I thought it was a great idea then. I'm less certain now. So anyway, the idea was to say, let's recognize that this service has tremendous public good value. And as a public good service, there with a broad benefit, it really is appropriate, if I can use that word, to fund it or to allocate costs on the basis of converted assessment. Because converted assessment is the default in the Local Governments Act. It's the one that we use typically as a reflection of ability to pay, and therefore it's the most progressive. And so for public good services, we use that. We took the approach in 2018. I took the approach in 2018. They accepted it. That you know, that's all great and that's all good and true. But also, as long as we want to use parks to connect people to parks and get people into parks, there's also a direct benefit. So the closer you are to parks and the more people you have to use parks, the kind of more benefit you may get relative to one of your neighboring jurisdictions. And the proxy because it's very difficult to kind of count how many people come in and go and where they're from and stuff. You can do it, but it's not great. The proxy then for kind of usage would be population. So we tried to kind of mix those two together. I thought it was brilliant at the time. It's a little complicated, maybe not so. Anyway, it's still a completely legitimate approach. And it wouldn't change the overall distribution too much, to be honest, because our assessment bases, our relative assessment bases are kind of in level with our different population differences as well, a little bit. It may shift things a little, but I don't think it's going to. We're starting with such a small amount to begin with as well. It probably isn't going to make a huge material difference, but it's more of a question of philosophy on do we like to recognize that direct benefit in addition to the indirect benefit, or are we more comfortable with that broad public good benefit?
Thank you. Then following that, the funding for acquisitions is the same, so it would be based on assessment. And have you seen anywhere where, so there's a particular piece of land that is deemed very important, but it's also very expensive. Could you increase the service funding for that acquisition and then lower it? Again, is it flexible in that way, and who would make that decision, the committee or the board or who?
Yes, through Your Worship again, if I may. The excellent question. And in fact, when we look at Central Okanagan began about 10 years ago. Central Okanagan Regional District looked at the needs around the region, looked at the demand, and said, holy smokes, we've got to start acquiring lands, and we've got to start doing it quickly because we haven't acquired enough. So we are going to put in place a levy, a special levy just for acquisition. And they actually, I believe they did it, it's in the report, but I believe they did it as a separate service and not just, so they kind of had two requisitions, one on a tax notice, one for regional parks operations and one for regional parks acquisitions. Other places simply say we're going to have one requisition, and then by policy, they take a portion of that and put it in reserve only for acquisition. So Metro Vancouver and Capital Region does that, for example. Anyway, to your question, the Central Okanagan, they raised significantly their acquisition requisition for a number of years, and they acquired a tremendous amount of land in doing that, and they borrowed some, and so they used the requisition as well then in the reserve to kind of pay back debt. And then after 10 years, they said, okay, now we feel that we have enough land to dial that back a little bit, and we now need to start to kind of manage it and provide trails where we hadn't had them before and that kind of stuff. So they actually brought down their requisition as well. So it's quite possible to do that. Nanaimo had in place, and I believe it still does, but it's getting rid of it, a parcel tax approach where they kind of kept bringing it up, and then they contemplated bringing it down, but they left it up there. But parcel taxes we don't recommend in there because they do tend to be regressive.
Yeah, I really like the idea of being able, because I think you can sell that increase based on the acquisition, which is, it's harder to sell an increase for operations or.
Yes, no offense to our municipal administration folks, but
for
yes.
Sure. Okay, else, do we want feedback at this point as well, or just questions?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with all the recommendations, and I'm interested in seeing a seat for the Comox First Nation on the committee, if that's possible to do pre-treaty through the government.
Sure.
I don't know whether that's actually a thing.
Definitely possible to do that.
Yeah.
And I think if I may, Your Worship, I think it's kind of up to Comox First Nation, but my
Yeah,
sense
obviously.
my sense from the local governments is that they would be quite willing to entertain that for sure. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, thanks, Ellen.
Thank you.
Great report. Yeah, so going back to sort of the goals of it, ecosystem protection and greenways and connectivity and cultural heritage, all those things I absolutely agree with, and I think, is represented in a lot of our guidance documents and stuff, which is great. But as you mentioned earlier, we also have the problem of our lake access, and if recreation isn't really in that list of values, how will that play out for us if we are looking for help with an alternative? Do you think that would be a problem for us setting it up in that way, that then we wouldn't be able to bring that type of concern to the board?
Thank you very much for the question, and through your worship. I think that we have been a little bit, and it could be more of a terminology thing. Many regional district services, well, and maybe I can answer it this way. There was, when we look at the evolution of regional park services, 15, 20, 25 years ago, recreation was very explicitly noted. And then it kind of went to passive recreation, and now it's kind of more be active in nature. So it's kind of the same thing. So I think we've said in there, be active in nature. So I think that would cover exactly what you're talking about, Councillor Kettler, and the idea that we do want to have opportunities for people to have access to water and to use that water in a active in nature way, recreation way, all those kinds of things. So and Kevin was very persuasive at the working group table in saying that, look, Cumberland Lake is getting too busy. We need other whatever you want to call it, recreation, active in nature, we need other opportunities in the region to take some pressure off. I will notice, just as a fun fact, Metro Vancouver, when it started, and this just kind of shows how terminology and evolution, our terminology changes, but also different kind of what's in vogue at any particular time will change. Metro Vancouver, when it first started, it had a car racetrack in a regional park. It had and it averaged and one of the driving, no pun intended, one of the driving factors behind the start of that service was so that people would have nice places to do Sunday drives in. So we've come from there. Not to suggest that we're going to go beyond recreation, but I think recreation is going to have a place. We'll just call it something slightly different.
Great, thanks for that answer. Yeah, I think I agree with having the committee. I know we can't get away from the local government rules of having the board decide, but I do like the idea of the 2/3 majority. I also had concerns about what Councillor Vicky brought up around the converted assessment and the population, and I'd like a little bit more information from our staff's perspective, I think, on what the implications of that might be for us in the long run. And yes, I wasn't quite sure about whether we should have the operating service separate from the acquisition, two separate line items or services within themselves, or a combined and just have a reserve within the one service. So I'm still not clear on that either. But yeah, everything else I feel pretty good about, and I know that there's been lots of discussion at the regional board about this service. There's been a lot of land that has come up, topics of discussion there, the Bevan lands and Stoughton Falls, and all sorts of places that are under development pressure and have a high ecological significance. So I think it's good that we're talking about it, and yeah, I look forward to further discussion. Thanks.
Your Worship, if I may, just very briefly, because Councillor Kettler's kind of touched on a very interesting point and an important point, I think, and with respect to the single requisition versus the two requisitions, I think that the answer will really kind of come out as a result of strategic planning and the land acquisition strategy. I think that the decision makers will have a very good understanding after going through those processes, and I suspect they may even be joined as one process, but those processes to as to kind of where the sentiment lies among residents and how important it is to really demonstrate that acquisition is safeguarded, earmarked, so forth, and all that, and more than just in a separate reserve. So it's a really good question you've raised, and I think that that's going to come out over the course of time in the relatively near future.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sproul?
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a lot to think about in here. I'm curious, like the groups that would be taking the lead in deciding what to buy, what to acquire. How does that go? Is it like we've only got so many hectares of forest land, so we need some forest land, or we need more waterfront on a lake like this one?
Sure.
We need to send people out looking around the land to see. And how is that decision made?
Yes, thank you, and through your worship, a very good question. And when one point to start with, and just in the response, is that every regional park service, at least the 6 that we've looked at, every successful regional park service has at its core a very well thought out land acquisition strategy, because it's all about acquiring and protecting those lands. The question then, as you pointed out, Councillor, is how does one come about? How does one develop that strategy? It is a set of criteria. We look to various regional districts. Typically, look to various look for advice from various groups, conservation groups, residents groups, groups like United Riders of Cumberland, groups, lots of different interest groups, lots of different science groups. We then also will look to typically ecosystem kind of inventories, and so we know like sensitive ecosystem mapping exists out there. So if one criterion is to really protect the most sensitive ecosystems, then that will get kind of informed by that kind of mapping that exists. Ultimately, though, it all comes back in the form of advice to the decision makers. First to the committee with their staff, and then with the staff of the working group and the regional district, and then ultimately to the board for buy-in and for acceptance of that. So criteria will be developed using advice from a variety of different players and agencies, from a variety of science-based approaches and inventories and resources, that sensitive ecosystem mapping just being one of those. And then it'll be up to the decision makers based on in discussions with their advisors as to kind of what seems to make sense and what's most needed here given the goals we're trying to achieve of protecting natural areas. Sure.
Okay, all right. Councillor Brown? Councillor Sproul? Are you finished?
Yeah, well, actually, just one more question, and this is how it pertains to Cumberland. We've been very fortunate, or I don't know how to put it, but to have lots of green space given to us, like Wellgood when they left Cumberland, gave a legacy, and that was Chinatown and quite a few areas here. A lot of the Wellington Colliery Railway right of way. And then the Forest Society, Canadian Forest Society, has managed to acquire through people's donations and inheritances and races to buy huge pieces of sensitive land. It could be difficult to get the people of Cumberland to actually put out tax money and money that we haven't, they've had a choice not having people do put money into buying price land, but they don't. Those that do want to have done so. So I'm just wondering how that will work.
Yes, and through your worship, it's a good question, and I suspect that. Well, I mean, the proof, we'll have to see where that goes as to kind of how, and you'll be a better judge than I will certainly, as to the willingness of Cumberland local taxpayers to contribute to the acquisition of lands throughout the region. I guess in strategic planning, it's always a discussion about the goals that the broader community is trying to achieve and the different ways then to achieve those. And so ideally, it would be the case that any requisition of taxes is going to be minimized by taking advantage of other opportunities, some of which you've noted. So the donations from timber companies, the work with conservation groups and on how to kind of, and trusts, the Comox Valley Trust, for example. You know, those kinds of tools hopefully can be maximized and in so doing really minimize the amount of taxes that would need to be raised. I suspect, however, at the end of the day that taxes will be required, and so it will be it'll be up to the decision makers then to determine in consultation with their taxpayers as to the willingness to pay for that, for protecting those areas.
Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the report again. Sure. Entirely comprehensive. Okay, I've got a couple things. One part of the report, the village and others would like, however, to see new destination parks in the valley to absorb some of the growing demand and access for nature, with water access particularly desired. This is definitely, I think, that the village is particularly interested in with the lake park, as we know, in Comox Lake. My personal interest in the regional parks system is really to promote some solutions to that, as well as all the more land acquisitions so we can attain through this system. What's next? Okay, through the report I noticed not a lot of data in the examples with the other regional parks and within our own regional system, which is a little disappointing. I'm pretty proud at Cumberland. We seem to be actually at the head of that with our trail counters and stuff, and UROC is really pays attention to that kind of stuff. So I'd like to see within the system, if that's even possible, some sort of more organized, comprehensive data collection system for an equity-based scenario, maybe. Just, I don't know how that really works, but just more info would really help out to make these decisions at the committee level kind of thing. What else we got? Oh yeah, and like Cumberland has a real disproportionately high assessment compared to the rest of the valley, and I mean the whole Comox Valley is going off. My personal house that I live in went up 46%. So just moving forward, I'm wondering how that's going to affect us with the assessment being really high, and how that affects our requisition with our excessive growth, which seems to be way more than the rest of the valley. So before we sign into something, that we can't get out of, I'm really reticent to be prepared for those charges.
Absolutely.
Stuff like that.
Thank you very much for those questions, and through your worship, if I may, just in response. 2 points then. One on data. Totally agree with you. I think that the data are very important, and I think the more that are collected, the better, particularly because in these kinds of shared services, and even more so as the service starts to acquire more and therefore enter into more spending decisions and need more funds, equity is going to, and perception of equity is going to be so important to establish. And so people, even though we're dealing primarily with the public good, there is still the sense on, and this is kind of expected and goes without saying to some degree, there is going to be a sense among different jurisdictions as to kind of wanting to understand how much use its residents are getting from the regional park system. In other jurisdictions, we see Metro Vancouver is probably the best set up in the sense of having very sophisticated trail counters and access counters on all of its parks. So it knows with a fair degree of accuracy how many visits it gets to every park. They also then, on top of that, will do periodic surveys, typically once every couple of years, to identify where people are coming from within the region. As you noted, Cumberland's done some of those, both on its own and through United Riders of Cumberland. Other places have done a little bit, the regional district's done a little bit on Seal Bay and in a couple of other parks, but we don't see a lot of those data in the other jurisdictions. And so we would want to, I think, if only to promote ongoing harmony amongst the jurisdictions, we would want to start collecting that data so that we could start to get ahead of any concerns or any disagreements and start to demonstrate that perceived, or at least demonstrate equity and hope that others share in that perception. I think then with respect to the assessment growth, yes, and as Councillor Brown kind of alluded to earlier then in her questions about kind of the different allocation formulas, is it going to be on converted assessment or converted assessment and population? If Cumberland's relative assessment base, and that is kind of the growth compared to that in other places, continues to be higher relative to other jurisdictions in the region, then Cumberland would be better, from a purely cost perspective, would be better suited, or would be more attracted to that hybrid approach of converted assessment and population. Because your population, then your relative converted assessment is going to be higher than your relative population. So to the degree that trend continues, and why wouldn't it? Because it's a beautiful place. Then yes, you're going to be better attracted, I suspect, to that hybrid approach.
Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely a fan of the supermajorities with the committee. Support that going forward. I like the comment about the safeguards within that committee. I mean, obviously what you just talked about, and us moving forward financially, as many safeguards as we could employ would be better. We've involved ourselves regionally before with services that we weren't entirely happy with, so we're very wary at this table of moving forward with some of these regional things, but this specifically, I find myself personally, I think that parks transcends tourism and ECDEV, and as you said earlier, it incorporates them both conveniently. But I think for the future of the entire valley, this is really important for us to move forward and fully involve ourselves. And most of the things that I read in the report, I was really happy to see just laid out in the proposed structure. Like almost all the notes I made seem to make them themselves available in the structure. So you guys did a really good job. So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, what I found really interesting in the reports, and I can't find them right now, about the greenways, parks and greenways. You didn't really talk about that a lot, but
Sure.
that's what I think we're really lacking in the Comox Valley, and Cumberland particularly, because we're 10K from Corton.
Yes.
Like that. And what have you seen of a mixed kind of group that some want to get large chunks of land, others like myself are passionate about linear parkways and the connections, and we're already working with the regional district, I believe, on quite a few initiatives. So how Can you have both of those happening at the same time?
Thank you for the question. Through your worship, yes, the short answer is yes. And when we look around the province at different regional park systems, and indeed when we look beyond the province at some very large regional park systems, including in the U.S., we see over time there being an evolution. There has been an evolution from services focused entirely on large parks to ones that and focused kind of dually on large parks and greenways. Between the parks, between like from jurisdictions to the parks, between jurisdictions. So yes, those greenways are becoming more important. When I was at Metro Vancouver in 2014 to 2016, that was when we really started to put a push on for more greenways for a lot of the reasons you talked about, Councillor, just the people really wanting those connection points and those opportunities to use them for active transportation. So we see that. We see in the Capital Regional District more of a push on greenways. Of course, we all know about the Galloping Goose Trail and the Lochside Trail and so forth, so those are coming forward. So, and in my area, in the central Okanagan, we've really put the pressure on getting more greenways as well. So I think that we're at a point now with regional park services where greenways are pretty much accepted as part and parcel of a regional park service and a very important component.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the report. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and a lot of interesting ideas and concepts. I have a couple of questions. Sure. I don't know if you can answer them, but I'm going to try. Under our present DCC bylaw, we have parks. We can collect money from them for parks. What do you see as us continuing that, or is that something that we would stop doing?
Excellent question, Your Worship. And if we look to, well, first of all, you would continue doing that for your parks. Okay. If we look at other regional park systems, nobody currently collects DCCs for regional parks. You can do it under the law, but nobody does it, and they don't do it because regional districts have been very careful not to be seen to be intruding on the domain of municipalities. So regional districts know that municipalities have relied on collecting development cost charges for acquisition of lands and more recently for development of lands. So regional districts are concerned about coming in and crowding out that local component that has become, on which local governments have really come to depend. And so yes, you would continue to do that, I would expect. And if the regional district chose to use development cost charges for regional parks, that would be a discussion for all jurisdictions to participate in and to ultimately decide through the governance model.
Okay. The 9-member board that you would say we structure, how are they appointed, or are they appointed by the board or by individual municipalities?
They would be ultimately they would be appointed by the board because it would be a board committee. However, we would expect that the board would, and we would put this in, we could add this to the bylaw as well, we would expect that the board would look to the individual jurisdictions to nominate their members. So Cumberland's member would be in essence nominated by council and then appointed by the board.
Could that be a member of council, or could it be a staff person?
We've stated in there it would be an elected official, and the reason we've noted that is because it would be important for the board to, knowing when it got a recommendation from the committee, that it had been looked at through the lens that only an elected official can bring to that.
Yeah, that can be interesting sometimes.
Double-edged sword.
Yes, it is. And I'm sort of leaning between operation and acquisition as being separate.
Yes, sure. Yeah, a completely legitimate perspective with it that others have done, and that depending on the sentiment out there, they can really go a long way to building support for it, for sure.
And certainly support the greenways. That is something that's coming up on a regular basis with us, and having a direct connection to Courtenay and Royston, yes. And I think it's long overdue.
Excellent.
Now, is this would this be a trail or a bike lane trail?
The way we've framed it in the proposed, service and the service framework is that the greenways would be off-road multi-use trails. You can have greenways that do use either entirely or for a portion of their length that do use kind of a side of a road, that kind of thing. We see that in many regional districts, and Nanaimo is a classic case of that. But really, greenways, we want to get, I don't want to sound presumptuous, we want to get, like it's my decision, we want to get to the point where they are kind of very true greenways, off-road multi-use trails in nature. So linear parks rather than the shoulder of a highway.
Okay, thank you. And have you had discussions with members of the Cumberland Community Forest Society?
No, we haven't, and that's an excellent question. And I will say that one of your staff members early in the game with our working group did make the point of saying we need to be involving the community. Everybody agreed with that, but said we're on a bit of a kind of a focus here to get this background study done, fully anticipating then as part of a strategic planning process that all of those groups would have an important role in that inclusive process.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of council? Then what is your pleasure? I think we've added a lot of our concerns and questions, and so what would you like to do? Councilor Rachel?
I would suggest that perhaps some formal feedback to the CVRD board might be appropriate, and I can highlight some of the items that relate to the 5 building blocks, and maybe Kevin can help me with that if council's comfortable making a formal recommendation. So from what I heard, there was an interest in inviting or exploring a seat on the committee with the Comox First Nation, explore the combined converted assessment and population cost recovery method, if that's the right terminology. Also, ensure service level equity. I think that might be a later, it's part of the strategic planning process, that piece,
Yeah.
the one Councillor Sutherland.
I think what would be most helpful would be specific comments on the proposed service framework.
Yeah.
So if council wanted to go into detail, it would be, full service participation, the funding, so for the discussion of population and what's the technical term?
Converted assessment?
I've learned a lot in this process. Sorry, what else are we have? The governance piece, I think the supermajority, I think what I've heard through council's discussion, but if council wanted to formalize that in a resolution in the last
Definition?
Was the separation of the
Yeah.
cost.
definition,
Yeah.
and that would
Okay.
be what this service is intended to do. And I
Yes.
think the greenways was an important piece. If the recreation piece felt like it needed to be bolstered, this would be council's opportunity to provide that way in as well.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the support for the protection of large tracts of ecologically significant areas if council also supports that. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
we really wanted this to be a conversation, but the most value in terms of the board would be something that comes from council, so as a whole, and that would be the comments on the building blocks.
Okay. Just one other quick question. The 9 members, will they be paid?
No, sorry.
Thank you for that.
And some maybe some comprehensive data, some more data around the valley, maybe? Is that part of
Well,
that?
we could
My
work that
suggestion
into the,
with
yeah.
That would be during strategic planning,
Yep.
that type of information to inform equitable use between areas.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm not sure, I think we had questions about the assessment, and/or assessment population, but I'm happy with the assessment. I think that's the most equitable and progressive way to fund this
But
service.
the question was asked, so let's get the information and share, which would
Oh,
be.
my question was answered.
Yeah.
Around that, so do we need more? Do you want more information?
You asked.
I just had concerns, like, yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be good for our staff to comment on.
How that might.
Yeah.
I would also like that.
Yes.
Okay, so
As
then
mine went up 58%, I want to know too.
Okay. That we're looking for feedback from our staff on the impact of using the converted assessment method or the converted assessment method and population for the funding model. But that's not recommendation to so that's why I'm getting a little confused now on process. So I think we're all agreed on the seat for Comox on the committee.
Yeah.
Yep. And we all want the committee structure.
Would you like that to make that in a motion? So
That's
that
what
we-
I'm trying to
think we
do.
are.
I think Rachel is forming it as I'm talking. So yes to the governance structure being the committee. Yes. And
Full participation.
full participation is paramount, and the separation of the acquisition and the operations.
Do we want more
I'm not
information
sure
on
about that.
Yeah,
That
I'm
one
not-
was a question mark for me.
Okay.
Me as well.
So, just in terms of process, the board will establish what they see best fits, but they'll take this information into consideration. So, ultimately, what I'm hearing is council supports the proposed service framework as established, with a couple items that you would like more information on. And what I would do is note those, and when staff, if the board chooses to establish a regional park service, staff would come back and provide a local level analysis on how this will impact Cumberland. At that point in time, I would, make sure, I'd ask Michelle to look into the converted assessment piece and population, how that would impact us, that type of thing. Unless there is specific interest in anything that diverges from the proposed service framework, I think a motion that just supports that would be quite helpful at this point.
Okay. Members of council?
I think I heard around the table that we would also like the recreation piece spelled out a little bit clearer rather than sort of a subtext, just because
Definitely.
it is quite an important piece for
There
council.
was mention in the report around the recreation piece being specific to access to water. So maybe that's the piece we want to pull out, because I think we also agree that the ecological value is the first value we're looking for. And recreation, particularly access to freshwater swimming, is would be the and the greenway
Well, the
between
greenways
here
would
and
probably be
yeah.
the second.
Yeah. The greenway between here and
We'll
Courtney.
take it off.
We can
Sorry,
put
Kevin.
this forward and then have a further discussion when they present it to us, when staff present it to us.
Okay, so I'm happy to make a motion that supports the general direction of the framework that's outlined with all that other feedback.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
You okay, Rick?
Carried.
Just no speedway, right?
Yes. Speedways, no.
Oh, you
Thank
had
your
to say
worship.
that.
We're including the point mentioned.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yes. Thank you very much for the work that you've done. Really appreciate it. Look forward to it. Final one. Yeah. Next, that council received the development permit 3699 Bevan Road report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. The purpose of this report is to seek council approval of a development permit to allow for the construction of a landfill cell referred to as Cell 2 and a secondary leachate equalization pond at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. The subject property is within development permit area number 1, environmental protection, and development permit area number 5, industrial. The proposed Cell 2 expansion is to occur in the I-4 zone. The site of the proposed leachate pond was within the I-2 zone, but on February 28th, Council approved a rezoning, or the zoning bylaw amendment 1165, that sees that portion of the property now as I-4, therefore allowing that type of development. And then I'm just going to touch on a couple of points from development permit area number 1, the environmental protection zone, and then permit area number 5, industrial. So in the DPA 1, The 1 hectare site of the proposed leachate pond was cleared approximately 6 years ago. And the DPA guidelines require that a diligent effort has been made in site design to preserve natural vegetation and restore historical forest densities. The leachate pond has been sited adjacent to existing development, and in an effort to retain the naturally regenerating vegetation, site development will avoid or minimize disturbance in the DPA beyond the secondary leachate pond footprint. As there is currently no prescription for tree placement in the DPA guidelines, as there would be in a tree protection bylaw, tree replacement is not a requirement of this permit. However, the CVRD has stated that they plan to transplant some of the saplings from the leachate pond site to the northern buffer area to help retain vegetation and increase the screening to the adjacent property to the north. Any future land alteration will require a subsequent development permit in which further retention of native vegetation and landscaping to provide screening would be addressed. And in the development permit area 5, that DP requires that where an industrial zone is adjacent to any property zone for residential use, a buffer will be designed to effectively screen from view and mitigate noise from the industrial use as effectively as possible through the use of landscaping, sound attenuating fencing, and siting. The property directly adjacent to the north is currently zoned I2, which permits residential use forming an integral part of the principal use. For the current development permit application, where the leachate pond and cell 2 are located a significant distance from the northern property line, a 15-meter buffer of existing and regenerating vegetation is suitable to comply with the DPA guidelines. Once again, if more intensive development is to occur in the future, then potential reduction of that 15-meter buffer would be addressed and would require a detailed consideration for screening and replanting, as well as wildlife connectivity. Staff recommend approval.
Any questions? Councillor Brown?
Thank you. I'm confused about the, so that we require a vegetated buffer because of the proximity to other differently zoned land, which I appreciate, but it sounds like we don't have a specific amount. Oh, that's the, okay. Because it seems to me that with intensified use, we might want to actually increase that buffer, not decrease that buffer. So between now and then, I guess we need to come up with a bylaw that actually has an amount.
Yeah, it's, I'm trying to think.
And the tree bylaw.
Yeah, so right now we don't have the tree bylaw, but sometimes it depends on the adjacent use. Potentially for residential, we would maybe ask for the sound attenuating fencing as well. That would be recommended. Yeah, it's really a case-by-case basis. Sometimes a biologist will make a recommendation on a buffer, but not in this case, unfortunately. And so the 15 meters is actually the required setback for building structures on that property. So we thought that would be a good start, would be the 15 meters, and then we could address it in the future if they have more development close to that edge, whether they need to have a planting plan to make it a lot thicker than just the regenerating vegetation or fencing or whatnot. It really depends on the use. But
Okay. And then my following question is where they're putting the second, the neighboring, I think it's the different parcel where the new cell is going. I think they've planted a bit of a buffer between, can you just confirm that there is a bit of a buffer between that and the greenway that we're hoping to have run?
yeah, so it's adjacent to the current landfill cell, and so they have the berm. I'm not sure exactly if they've replanted it at this point. I know it had a lot of trees on it previously.
Yeah, I think it has little.
Yeah, they've recently replanted the berm, so that does cover it from Bevan Road or screen it from Bevan Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I just will say the leachate pond is below ground, so it won't have the same impact potentially as the landfill cell itself. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Anyone else have any questions?
So they did say they would take some trees from the area that they're going to have the leachate pond, the second leachate pond. and replant them along the northern edge?
Yeah, they propose to put them either along the buffer, the berm, or the 15-meter buffer, whichever area is better for planting potentially.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes. Pull it more towards you.
Yes, here we go. Right where the railway, Wellington Colliery Railway right-of-way is from the buffer up to where it runs beside the Bevan Road, will that be will be a walking trail? Am I understanding this one that's further to the south of the Bevan Road? The actual Wellington Colliery Railway, actually.
I'm not sure. I didn't look at that as part of this development permit.
Oh, okay.
Courtney might.
Aye.
I'm not sure if you have any additional information, but it was outside of the scope of this permit at this time. But
all right.
I do know it's part of other potential plans.
Okay. Someone like to make the motion?
I'll move the council approve the development permit to allow the development of a secondary leachate pond and the construction of a landfill cell on the property described as Lot A, Section 26, Plan EPP 111857, 3699 Bevan Road.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Carried. Next, that the Community Heritage Register additions and 2022 and 2023 Heritage Committee Work Plan Report be received.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this report is to present both two new features that are proposed to be added to the Community Heritage Registry, and then also the Heritage Committee Work Plan and summary of activities for 2019-2021. So the committee has been working on completing statements of significance ever since the Community Heritage Register was established, and has been able to complete about 1 to up to 4 sites per year. So this is the most recent completion of 2 sites, the Waverly Hotel and the Cumberland Community Church, which we were able to do thanks to budgeting on by Council for that, but also a Heritage Legacy BC fund that contributed to completing the research required to complete the statements of significance. So both are attached to the report, and they are required to document the sites that are to be added to the Heritage Register when filed with the province. So that's number 1 of the report, and then the second part is the Heritage Committee Work Plan. The Heritage Committee has been very busy over the past year and a half, and with quite a number of referrals, which is testament to the growth that Cumberland is experiencing, of course, in the downtown core, and a number of research reports as well, referred to by Council, statements of significance that were completed, and these are summarized in the appendix, I think 5 it is, towards the end of the report, or 4. And then the Heritage Committee is also presenting its work plan to Council. So we have now a very enthusiastic and active Heritage Committee. So they are seeing a few possible projects, but extending into 2023. Because we're partway through this year, and because of COVID, things got slowed down, and no work plan was presented in the previous year for this year. So this was combined together. So you have that work plan attached as Appendix 4, and I'm happy to answer any questions. In terms of financial implications, the committee didn't make a specific budget request at this time. There's still a possibility to submit that by July, but generally is seeking Council support for funding for the initiatives that it's proposing, particularly completion of statements of significance and participation in local, regional, and provincial heritage activities that support the goals of the village. So more specific requests can be brought forward by July of this year.
Questions?
Questions?
You ready? Okay, Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you. I really enjoyed this report. I'm really happy that this exists in our village, that people can read about our history in this way. I was surprised at a couple of stories, specifically about the United Church, and I will read an excerpt. The Cumberland Community Church congregation was formed after disagreement over national church policy at the Cumberland United Church regarding sexual orientation as a criteria for membership and ordination. And all but 6 members of the United Church congregation left the United Church over this disagreement, which I thought was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating and ironic that the weird church is so weird, and that here we are in this day and age, and so many things are different, and very grateful for those differences. And
Clarity, people against it left.
Excuse me.
yes, oh, yeah. Well, yes, yes, okay. Fascinating as it goes. And also, I just had a question about what the and the work plan. I really like the work plan. What is the Jailhouse Dragermans building?
Oh yeah, I just had an opportunity
that.
to visit that or walk past this. We had site visits the other evening of some of the sites that the committee is considering, and also to educate all members on the committee, some of the newer members, of what the different heritage areas of Cumberland are. And we did go by the Dragerman's shack and jailhouse, and I probably shouldn't be the one that tells you about them. There's so much more knowledge on the committee, but the Dragerman's building that was used by the mine rescue teams. So the Drager was the brand name of equipment used by the breathing apparatus used by the rescue teams in the mines to protect them from the noxious gases in the mines. So that was the equipment shack and I guess assembly building. I'm not entirely sure. We'll find out more if that gets worked on more. And then the jailhouse is associated. That was both were moved from a different site. I think number 6 Mine Park. But yeah, she's not allowed to talk. So more to come. hence the interest. 2 very important
Well, I look
buildings
forward-
and part of Cumberland's history, especially the mine rescue work. We're always focusing on the strike in Cumberland. A lot of heritage interpretation does, but the mine rescue was such an amazing part of our history, and probably lots of stories of sacrifice.
Just have to say that that was a lot of fun the other night. Was it 10, 12? I don't know. It was a pile of people.
Put your mic
Oh,
on, please.
Sorry, it is on. Oh,
Pull it closer towards you.
okay. Yeah, it was very interesting to see such a turnout, to look at the Bevan houses this time and see what people had done and guess, is this really a Bevan house or is that just a little bit bigger than it should be? Anyway, we strolled all through the streets and we even got invited in to a very gracious house. So I don't know if that's COVID friendly or whatever, but it's going to be on the garden tour, I think. Anyway, it was very good. So thanks for arranging that, all of you.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Yeah, I quite enjoyed reading the reports as well, particularly the Waverley one, because I did spend some time there. And did not know that one of the owners of the King George tried to set it on fire. So now I know why there was a long-standing rivalry between the King George and the Waverley. Also, the church thing was super interesting as well, which I vaguely remember. And I really appreciated the work plan, and I note that the staff recommendation is to receive the work plan, and I just want to make sure that we are also perhaps asking staff to bring back a report on what kind of funds they might need to do that work, and making sure that we are like in agreement with the work plan. We want them to do that. So
Yes.
my thoughts on that.
Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a big thanks to the Heritage Committee because they have been doing a lot of work. Not only the statements of significance, but all the referrals that they've been getting from us. It's a lot, and they are doing some heavy lifting for us. So thank you very much. Yeah, on the work plan, there's a lot there, and I'm just wondering how council wants to address, because there's requests in there, I would say, from the committee around various items. So how should we go about addressing the 10 items that they have listed in the work plan? you know, one of the things that they have is number 4 about ongoing development of the Heritage Conservation Toolkit. And I know Council did that workshop on what heritage tools were currently available to us, and I think we do use a number of them already, but are we planning to follow up with that at all, that workshop that we did on heritage conservation tools?
Yeah, I can respond to that. So as part of the committee training this year, new members, I did give a presentation about some of the tools and in brief form. So I think this is a recognition in the work plan that there's ongoing education for committee members, but also in the application of the tools. And all of them are recognized in the Heritage Management Plan as potential tools for the village to use. And in fact, we have access to all of them and use them in different ways. So I think when we say ongoing development, it partially depends what comes forward as a referral from council. Thanks to the Heritage Committee members, one suggestion most recently was to require a commemoration plan for the Cumberland Hotel. And that is a tool that we haven't used previously. So it recognizes this, it's kind of a statement of significance before demolishment at the end of a building's life, but it's nonetheless an important tool that I think we're now learning about as a result of that recommendation. So it's an ongoing self-education, education committee members, understanding of how we can use those tools and apply them as referrals come forward to the committee. And yeah, so.
Okay, Councillor Sullivan, you had your hand up?
Sorry, you finished? No,
Yeah, just how we're going to address the 10 items that have been laid out.
They will be addressed down the road. We're waiting for their, we're going to receive the 2022-23 Heritage Committee Work Plan, and then it will be presented to us again.
So, yeah, for clarification to Mayor and Council, so the committee work plan here, it says draft. It was discussed at a committee. During our walk, committee members feel comfortable with this, so this is for your information. At this point, it'll come forward together with the minutes when they're presented. But really, if you have questions now, please feel happy. Please, I'm here to answer your questions. And if there's specific questions that you want me to go back to the Heritage Committee, that you want more clarification on, we can do that. So, I think number 1 is really the committee, that's its ongoing work, responding to referrals. And number 2, statements of significance is already in the budget for 2022. We had some carryover from 2021. We'll seek funding again from BC, from the Heritage Legacy Fund to complete statements of significance. Number 3, the commemoration plan is part of the heritage alteration permit for the Cumberland Hotel. They contacted the museum to work on that, so that will come to council and the committee. The ongoing development of the Heritage Conservation Toolkit, as I said, is really having an awareness of the full range of tools that's available, and they're all in the Heritage Management Plan, so they're all within our toolbox, and understanding what they are, how you best use them. And I think the commemoration plan, like I said, is one of those tools that'll be explored more because it's part of a HAP. The Heritage Committee work online, number 5, is in our work plan this year. So the staff is working on posting all the statements of significance and updating the heritage pages to the work plan. The Heritage Plaque or the equivalent project, so this is just an initial scoping by the committee. This may require budget request, and that would then be a request for 2023. Street naming policy came forward in discussions with staff. Are you okay if I go through it like that?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah?
Yes.
Sure.
Sorry.
For clarification. We'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Number 7, the street naming policy is something that came up in discussion with staff. As time of subdivision, we consult a list that's in council policy that has all the street names, and they're currently based on a district in Cumbria area of the northern England's Lake District. And Cumberland is so much more than sort of colonial Britain, England, and so there has been a feeling that maybe we need to look at that at one point, but there would be an initiative from council that would be referred to the Heritage Committee. So it's on the radar here that it's something that the committee sees as being a bigger component of placemaking in the village, and recognizing heritage and diversity of the village. But it would have to be a referral from council.
Can we stop there?
Just a minute, Karen.
Yeah, I'll just finish.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
okay, sorry. Heritage collection of heritage inventories. We have a number of. We have the heritage management plan, the statements of significance, our type of inventory. There we have a heritage inventory as part of the heritage management plan. The museum has inventory, so there's just a recognition that should we connect these all up somewhat, and I think probably work on the website will help lead to that as well. How are we connecting all these resources, or so we understand what they all are, where they are, and how they may overlap or how they support each other. The committee terms of reference is a flag that if there is a review of committees, which sometimes happens when new councils come in at the end of a term, and in the past the committees have commented on any updates to their terms of reference. So,
Okay.
Yep, thanks. That was great. Yep.
Okay. Councillor Sullivan.
Sorry, during my comments, it's something I really want to pull out is the street naming policy. I would like to put that to the top of the list for my personal preference. Councillor Kettler and I have talked years and years ago about renaming different streets and maybe moving forward, not just the new streets, but yeah, definitely reconsideration of some of the original street names. I would be supportive of talking about. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Everybody, go ahead then.
Okay, thank you. What I'm hearing is that all of these separate items would need a referral from council in order to be enacted at a later date. And I think what I was hoping when I saw this plan is that council could approve the plan and then look to staff to provide a report on how we might fund the plan, or if there are other details that we need to figure out, like whether or not we're going to do the plaques or not. But I think, yeah, I want looking to move it forward in a way. Okay. And I think when we're talking about the conservation toolkit, I think the committee has quite a lot of expertise, and we could be asking them for recommendations now in the context of this report so that we have better tools moving forward before we have another application to tear down a building, for instance. Like actually giving them some more work to do if they're willing, because I think they have the expertise to do that, and it would always come back to council anyway.
Yes. Thank you very much. The second motion will be to receive the Heritage Committee work plan, and then we will work from there, if that's everybody's understanding. One of the problems is we didn't put a lot of money in our budget for this year, and so we have to be careful on what we're approving to make sure that it fits within the budget. Okay?
Okay, so...
But if it's okay, I'm going to ask my questions now.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much for the report. I really enjoyed reading both of them about the Waverley and the church. Brought back many memories. I knew that my husband's uncle had owned the Waverley at one time, Frank Dallas, and his son married my father-in-law's sister. And so there was a connection there. There was also another family member that owned it at one time, but he wasn't mentioned, so he's going to check that out and find out what happened there. But who knows? It's history. On page 164, you've got a question under Heritage Advisory Committee, early 1990s. Yes, when I was elected to council, I asked to start a Heritage Committee, and the mayor at the present time said only if I chaired it would he accept that we had a heritage committee. And during that time, we did a lot of work. We produced the Green Book. We did the design guidelines for the main street. We did all those storyboards that are on the buildings. And we did the plaques that exist within the community. And it was a very a hugely working group of people that were really keen on the heritage of the community. And I think Councillor Sproul, you took it on when I left. Yeah. And yeah, so there was a lot of work done, and interesting to go back and reread the history. Pretty close to what actually happened. Sometimes you can't put in print the actual things that did happen. So thank you very much. And as far as the work plan, I totally agree with everything that they want to do. It's just a matter of setting up the process to make that happen. And yeah, and especially looking at the terms of reference for the committee, I think it's timely because committees change, work plans change, and we need to update that piece of documentation.
Just about those storyboards, those are getting pretty old too.
Yes, they
Hard
were.
to see the Campbell's Brothers one and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
We decided to put
adding
them on
something like that to them.
on the properties where the building formerly existed, that it didn't exist there anymore. That was what was behind that. And when we started the plaques for the houses, the homeowner paid $50 towards each plaque because we wanted them to take ownership of the plaque. And when we did the design guidelines, we had one business that refused to be included. And after we completed it, they were very, very disappointed that they had not been involved because it was very successful design guidelines. So the ministry at that time had a very, very proactive heritage function in the ministry and supplied a lot of funding and a lot of expert advice to community groups that were involved in heritage. And we had all our files and reports Judith Walker dealt with when the committee folded. And so those files should be here somewhere. I'm not sure where or if they are still in existence. Okay. So can we have a motion?
Can I move that council receive the 2022 and 2023 Heritage Committee work plan and ask staff for a report on how this work might be completed?
Okay, we need the other one too.
Oh, that council add the Waverly Hotel and Cumberland Community Church, each documented with a statement of significance to the Cumberland Community Heritage Register, and notify the owners and the minister responsible for the Heritage Conservation Act.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, recommend that council receive the referral of City of Courtenay draft official community plan report.
Your receipt.
Second.
Seconder?
Yep. Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Good evening. Okay. So the purpose of this report is to seek council direction on a response to the City of Courtenay's referral of their draft official community plan. The City of Courtenay reviewed their OCP in the last couple of years, have now presented a draft for comment. Staff, we reviewed the OCP to understand if new policies may impact shared interests that cross municipal boundaries, like transportation, housing, or environmental protection. It's important to note that the village and the City of Courtenay do not share a municipal boundary. No concerns with any of the content related to interests of the village has been identified. The report does attach a City of Courtenay staff report with a more thorough review of the changes between the current OCP and this draft new official community plan for further reading. And the recommendation is that council respond to the City of Courtenay's referral of its draft official community plan with no concerns.
Any questions? Someone like to move the motion then?
Can we?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have questions, yes?
Well, I didn't get to go through it in detail, I have seen, read the overview from our staff and some of the highlights in the document, but I was kind of going through it, looking a little bit more for I know they made climate change a real central feature of this OCP, and I think that's wonderful. I was just looking a little bit more for what they're sort of planning to do around floodplain areas and sort of the conundrum of density often being around areas that are floodplain, and plans for dealing with that in the future, possibly moving people. I just didn't get that far into the OCP, but I'm wondering if staff were able to find anything relating to that in their analysis of it.
The city of Courtenay hasn't highlighted that as any change that they're making. So I don't have a clear answer to that question.
I'll look at it more, and there's still time to submit before the deadline, right?
No, the deadline was the 8th, I think. Or maybe just different deadline for us.
Different deadline, so March 21st.
Okay.
They do say it as, they show it as a no-growth area, but they don't say how they're going to manage that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. What? Yes?
I was looking at it mostly thinking about our coming up OCP
Well,
process.
good timing.
And thinking, this is awesome. And thank goodness we're not going to be doing ours during a pandemic. So kudos to them for the consultation that must have been so challenging in getting this document out, because they did consult with an enormous number of organizations and people and did the best they could with that. So there's that. And I did have a chance with the Food Policy Committee to look at the food security section, and it does suggest that we do a regional food security plan, which I thought was a really great idea, because the food growing area is spread throughout all of the municipalities and the regional district, and so we really need to look at it from a regional lens. Because we don't have any ALR and we need other people to grow our food. So yeah, I just wanted to give them I think it's a great document, and they worked really hard, and I appreciated the lenses and the whole thing. Thanks.
Any comments?
I'm impressed with it, really, more or less, other than what the councillors have already mentioned, which I also agree with.
Okay. Thank you very
And
much.
the timing is very good for us to pick some good stuff out of there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it's like any other OCP, it goes over the time they allot. It always seems to. They never finish on time. And it's usually the public consultation. And mind you, they had COVID to deal with, so it was much more difficult to do that. So, very impressive document. So, someone like to move?
That council will respond to the City of Courtenay's referral of its draft community plan with no concerns.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. That council receive the 2022 Community Grant Program Report.
Move receipt.
Second.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. This report presents the annual community grant program that you see every year with a grant budget of $10,000. Just to review quickly, this is for one-time special projects and seed funding. It does not fund operating projects for the long term. And the criteria for the applications is that they must further the village's strategic priority, and those things include things like arts and music, affordable housing, food security, climate change, mitigation and adaptation, and also the development of new community services. 3 applications have been received, which are outlined in the report from the Comox Bay Care Society for caravan health promotional, teaching, and monthly pop-ups. A second from the Cumberland and District Historical Society for Cumberland Museum monthly family days. And the third from the Word Church for their Truth and Reconciliation discussion forum. In the report, you'll see the original request. We asked for a minimum request in the application to make the program actually run, what they could manage with. And then there's a third column to give another funding option for council at 70% of the original request, and to meet that $10,000 budget. There is a suggestion for use of any surplus funds if council decides not to allocate the whole $10,000, with options being set aside funds for potential grants later in the year. Occasionally we do receive requests that council does want to consider outside the grant program, and a good example is tonight's letter from the Comox First Nation about the Guardian program. Council can donate funds to a service organization, and I did mention that twice. I didn't mean to give it any extra points. It was just an error, so I'm not pressing that recommendation. And if there was a significant amount of funds, you could offer a second intake, or you could allocate unused funds to the COVID Restart program, which that report is coming up following this one. And I also included in the report just the reporting for last year's grant program. Council approved funding for the Legion branch out of Oceanside, I believe it was, for $2,100, and unfortunately, because of a number of factors, that research on veterans experiencing homelessness was unable to be completed, so they're asking for an extension for that program. So that is recommended as well. So I'll leave it to council to
So who would like to start this one? Okay, Councillor Brown?
I'm game. I love this. I think we have really good applications here that are addressing need in our community, and I'm happy to support them. I have a concern about the 70% option because we have asked the organizations that are applying to frame their request with a request and a minimum request, and so arbitrarily choosing 70% to support them isn't really respecting that dynamic of minimum request. And we are, so if we look at the total requests, we're only $2,000 over. So if we give the Comox Bay Care Society $6,000, which is their minimum request, and the Weird Church $2,500, then we have $1,400. Well, we actually have $1,500 left to give to the museum for that programming, and that fills the budget. I think when we tell people we have a $10,000 budget for a grant program and they oversubscribe it, working a 70% option and then using surplus funds to go somewhere else is disingenuous, because we've said we have $10,000 to spend and then we're giving it to someone who didn't apply if we do that. So I don't want to, I know we have had cases where we have surplus before and allocated it to an awesome group, Broombusters, but I think if we have groups in the community that want to do good work, then we should support them and use the minimum request as it was included in the grant.
Okay, Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I like the 70% because I do feel like there will be other requests, and I want to leave some in the kitty, as it were, for that. Like, are the Broom Busters, have they ever formally come to us, or have we just kind of done this?
They haven't applied. They were advised last year that it was an option for them.
They accept donations, but they don't apply
Right.
for funding.
Yeah, I mean, they do good work, and I would want them to continue. So I don't know if council should consider a different way of funding that, or I don't know if we can't do much more than encourage them to apply, but likely they don't have a board or
No, they don't.
which is probably preventing them from having a formal process to apply.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would still like to help them out, even, even though they haven't formally applied. So anyway, I also support the other nonprofits that have put forward requests. Yeah, the Caravan does really good work, but of course their request is the majority of our entire budget, so that makes it a little bit tough to fulfill that entire request. Yeah, maybe I'll just let other people talk while I mull this over a bit more.
Councillor Sproul?
Yeah, I'm quite happy about this system here, granting 7% of the request. I feel comfortable having a little bit of unused funds, just in case we had some difficulties in the past with not having to cover the request. But I think it's a good idea to give a certain amount to the Broom Busters and allocate unused funds to the COVID Restart Grant Program. Or, is this the truth? Any unused surplus, the general fund, accumulated surplus reserve. Is that the same as unused funds for the COVID Restart?
That would be if council did set aside funds for a late applicant, and then an application didn't arrive, and there would be surplus in that budget, and it would go to that surplus reserve, or the general funds. Oh, it would remain in the host amenity funds. Okay, correction. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Sullivan?
This is my favorite process as well. I liked what Councillor Kettler said about some of the 70% stuff. I do like supporting the Broom Busters, and I liked the mayor's suggestion about the Guardians Watchmen could use some too. That said, I do agree that placing a minimum request is definitely a specific question, so that makes it tough. Which also leaves us with a little bit more at the end if we go with the minimum request. So I'm right in the middle of that.
Let me help you with that. I think since we ask people to apply for this program, so we've set aside $10,000 in our budget, and then we spread the word throughout the community for people to organizations within the community to apply for that funding. And then we say, well, we're not going to spend it all. I feel like that's, again, disingenuous. So we have right in the application process, we have limited funds. We only have $10,000 to spend. And I'm suggesting a way that we can spend that $10,000 on the people who have taken the time to apply and clearly need the funds, rather than giving the funds to another organization, which clearly does amazing work. And we gave them money last year to do that work, and they specifically do not apply for grants because they're a volunteer organization and they do what they do without funding. So I think to take money from this and give it to another program or another organization that hasn't applied is not good process. We have a process for the grants, and we, I believe, should adhere to that process. Otherwise, we're setting up, it's not a fair process. We've told these people that we have $10,000 to spend. They've all worked their applications around that.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I definitely don't feel that it's as disingenuous as you're implying. I mean, these people are asking us for funds. If we do the 70%, we're allocating equal amount to each of their asks. So that's very genuine. The fact that there's some leftover money is part of that. So that's just my 2 cents on that one.
Okay,
I don't think that's. I think this grant program is very generous and not disingenuous. That's how I feel.
Rachel, you had your hand up.
One possibility in regards to the services the Broom Busters provide to us is exploring actually having them invoice us for some of the services they provide. And I haven't explored that with our Parks and Recreation Department. But that is an option that I've thought of discussing with them, but I haven't. It's something that we could explore if that helps resolve the issue of making an unrequested donation.
Mm-hmm.
We could look into that.
I do like the 70%, and yes, we have money left over, but my concern is like the Kumaway Culture Society. They sent a request in, usually at last minute. And so we're always trying to help them, and I know we only put this out to the community. There's lots of other communities, groups that chose not to apply now, and that's appropriate for me to say we've kept to what we did last year. We gave 70% out last year, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
I think last year, if I recall, the requests were well above the allocated budget, and that was a way to resolve that.
So, if you think it is a perception problem, then we need to change the wording in our policy.
Agreed. If I was I've spent my career applying for grants. So if I was in a grant program and I was told that there was a certain budget amount, and then the whoever organizing group that was giving out that money decided to not spend that budget but allocate it to other things, I feel like that's creating a system that's not fair.
Well, I guess technically one person could ask for the entire budget.
And that's not very fair either.
No, but they're doing that within the guidelines of the grant. So anyone can ask for the whole $10,000. We're obviously probably not going to give it to them. So our job is to then work within the parameters of the grant that we've set out, which says we have $10,000. Here are the parameters.
But we're at a table where some of the council members think that 70%, like we did last year, is reasonable to still do. I mean, we all have different
I
opinions.
understand that. I disagree, that's all.
That's what this table is all about.
Yeah.
Talking about it.
Okay, so we need a motion from somebody.
So I'll move that we allocate $6,000 to the Comox Bay Care Society, $1,400 to the museum, the Historical Society, and $2,500 to the Weird Church, and we put the $100 aside for last-minute requests.
Seconder? Councillor Sproul, second it. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. What's the other motion?
I move that we give 70% to each of the 3 applicants and have the remaining money sit in the host community fund for late requests.
Second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Okay. Opposed? Okay, Councillor Brown. Okay, carried. Could we have another motion that we look at the wording in our policy?
I can move that. I'd like to make a motion that we find a way to reword the policy so that we are clearly outlining how much money we're going to give in total for the grant program and how the funding works.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Okay. Next, we have that council received the sorry? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. There is a second one there that council approved an extension.
The council approve an extension to the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 76 for the 2021 project to the 2021 research project for the Cumberland, Comox Valley, and Oceanside region to determine the number of homeless or near homeless veterans.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. And if that money is not spent, then it comes back into the community grant for next year. Thank you very much. Next, that council received the 2022 COVID-19 Restart Grant in Aid Program report.
Move receipt.
Second. Is this when I say anything? I'd like to make a motion to
Just a minute, we're bringing it on the table.
Sure.
The motion has been made to put it on the table. It's been seconded. So now, before we vote, is that the proper way, Rachel, to do this? They voted to receive the grant, but Councillor Sullivan would like to refer it.
Yep, but ahead of the staff report?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I think you should receive it first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so all in favor? Carried. Now, Councillor Sullivan?
Some councillors received this as a late item. I got this package just before 3 o'clock, so I'm not quite ready to deal with it. So I'd like to table it to the next meeting.
Okay. So you're making a motion to table?
Yes.
So someone can
I'll second.
second, and there's no discussion, as far as I know, on a tabled motion? Am I not correct? Is there discussion on it?
Just time and place is what you're supposed to talk about.
There's no discussion on the table?
So when it
Should we have had the discussion?
was supposed to be when it's supposed to be tabled is the only discussion you're supposed to have time and place of.
So the motion of next meeting was incorrect.
No.
No,
Oh.
No,
that's what we're
correct.
supposed to talk about.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
then-
just
that's-
wondering, yeah.
Then-
That's the only thing you can
Oh.
talk about. You
Yeah.
can't talk about the pros and cons.
Right, so I'm wondering when we do talk about the pros and cons.
You're not at liberty to talk about it because he tabled it.
But could we have the discussion when we received couldn't we have had that discussion when we received the reports?
We could defeat the motion and then redo the motion, couldn't we?
Yes.
So you want to defeat the tabled motion?
Not in the same meeting.
If the motion to table it to the next meeting is defeated, then you would consider it at this meeting.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Is that what
Right, but then we can't defer it.
What?
somebody needs to clarify this? Okay.
So you, My understanding is you can't defeat a motion and then bring it right back again.
No.
At the same, okay.
We
So
could make a
you
motion
either-
to change the time, so for, 2 months from now.
Didn't you second the motion? Did we vote
I
on
did.
it?
That's right.
We
So
haven't
you're,
voted
you're,
to table the motion, but we haven't discussed when it will be tabled to. That's the,
But we didn't, you seconded it, but we didn't vote. did we?
No.
no.
so you have to vote on this motion, and if it's defeated, you
So
will
my
be
motion is to
considering the
table it
report.
to the next meeting.
Okay, so if you don't want a discussion, then we put the motion through to table it. If you want a discussion, we have to defeat it.
But then
And we
you
won't
have
be
to
able to
consider the
table it.
report. You
Yeah.
can't bring it
Oh,
right back.
okay,
Yeah.
that's fine,
That's what I was
okay. So there's a motion on the floor to table till the next council meeting?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, carried. Thank you for the clarity. All I knew was that you couldn't discuss a tabled motion once it's on the,
Yeah, just time and place. Yeah.
yes. Okay.
Now we know.
That council receive the wastewater upgrade project budget update report for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Is he still hanging out on the screen? On the camera.
Is that little voice that we heard?
Oh wow, I can just not be on the screen.
Sit back.
Yeah, I don't have to be on here at all.
Paul is joining us by Zoom, so just take a second to,
Do you deal with tabled motions a lot?
Fair amount.
This is our first time.
Yes.
Not for a
Usually
long
send it back
time.
for more information.
Yes.
Hi, Paul. Can we test your speaker there? Make sure we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay, we're just taking a little break, and we'll be ready in a minute for your presentation. I believe Rob's going to introduce the report.
Okay.
Sure.
I haven't got a PowerPoint. All I'm going to do is just go through the summary of the report.
Can we get this one on again? Is that another thing? No. Fuck, I can barely.
Yeah. We get this fancy system and it's
My left ear is my bad ear. So it's like way
you need one of those big horn things, like the old
They work.
They probably do.
No, I've tried that before. It works.
Okay, we're ready again.
You want me to introduce the report, Paul, or are you going to take it away?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Alrighty. Just have to make sure I've got my YouTube volume turned off so I don't get feedback here. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. It's great to be back in front of you, if not actually being in front of you. Had I known that the travel restrictions would be lifted so quickly, I would have come over. But anyway, hope this will be the last one by Zoom for a while. I am just going to try and share the screen here to scroll through.
So, have we received the...
Oh.
Yeah.
You should probably receive the report before I do that.
Yes, we did.
Okay. No, it's okay.
What's going on?
Okay. Are you seeing my report on the screen?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, great. So I don't have a PowerPoint, and I thought all I would do here, I hope you've all had a chance to read it. I know it's not as exciting as the parks and other things on the agenda tonight, but it is important. But I just thought here I'll just quickly go through the summary of it, and then take any questions you have, and we can go through the body of it then. So the recommendations there, they are big ones. This is literally where we actually get to work on the project. So it's an important thing. Earlier, we had resolutions from a month ago. We haven't actually done site clearing works yet, and we probably won't get to it till April, but anyway, we're approved. And of course, a year earlier from these, we approved the contracts to hire the major team members, but we hadn't actually approved any money for doing any work. Then, of course, a month ago, we did this one to split the project into the 2 phases. And so that's good. But for the rest of tonight, it's all about phase 1. Okay. So when we started out this whole process, we came up with this magic number, $9.7 million back in 2017, 2018. We're working away on it now as we get into more detailed design, and regrettably, of course, the budget is heading in the wrong direction. It's not surprising, but we wish it wasn't. Okay, so table 6 in this report, our estimated costs are currently 9.5. We have a contingency on the construction items, and comes out to total here of 10.7. So as we do more detailed design, things change from estimates to firm pricing. So when we say, okay, we're going to buy equipment X for $500,000, and we have a firm price and a contract, right, we don't need a 30% contingency on that because it's now firm. So as we progress, some things become more accurate, but also the contingency was to cover stuff that we didn't think about, or a level of detail we just didn't get to. So it doesn't mean it's going to disappear, but we hope it gets more accurate. And that process, preliminary design, we'll have it complete at the end of April, and Integrated Sustainability will produce a preliminary design report, which encompasses all the changes that have happened over the last year. And then from that, we will have the next iteration of the budget update. So for tonight, this is the key point. In authorising the go-ahead tonight, Council must be aware that they are committing to the full project scope, as it is not practical nor cost-effective to reduce the scope once we are under construction. And given our upper bound is currently 10.7 million, it's more than possible. It's probable we'll exceed 9.7. So in giving the go-ahead tonight, I'm not asking for a budget increase. I'll come back in mid-May when we actually have a better idea of what the budget increase will be. But in effect, we are committing ourselves, or you are committing Cumberland more accurately, to the course of action that might invoke this budget increase. And once we start, we can't turn back. Or to use Michelle's phrase, the train's leaving the station. So that's the key thing for tonight. So we want to get authorization to commence the procurement and construction and expand the amount currently authorized. So I'm just going to come back up to the 2 resolutions to explain that a little bit more. We have an authorized budget of 9.7 million. That's in the capital plan. We've previously authorized contracts for just over 3 million of that. And we have this amount here that hasn't been authorized. So if I ask you to authorize construction, and you say, go ahead and start building, it's of no help to me if I can't increase the contract for Maple Grinders, because that is the avenue by which the money gets spent. So why I've structured it like this is that you explicitly recognize we're starting construction and you're authorizing the budget to be spent, and the avenue that we do it is through the Maple Grinders contract. So I think with that, I will actually stop there for my verbal report and take questions from council. And I can go to any point in the report if you so desire. Thank you.
Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have any questions. I mean, it's not great news, again. And I do have concerns about us needing to borrow more money, possibly. But ultimately committing to the full budget, I don't really see as a problem. We know that we're going to have to pay this one way or the other, so I think it's important that we are able to purchase as much equipment as we can ahead of time, especially with all the trouble with purchasing that people are having around trucking and all the other things of getting actual equipment to us. So having that on site, I guess we'll have it on site. I guess that was one of my questions, is where we would store everything. We did have a break-in at the wastewater treatment plant once, and do we have secure location to store all our nice fancy equipment? And yeah, it would be good to have it so it's ready when the workers are there on site and ready to work.
Okay.
It certainly would be. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. I think that was slowing things down a little bit. If I may address the concerns there in order, our budget increases aren't as bad as other people, other projects. That's a small consolation, but overall I think we're doing pretty well to be where we're at. If we hold off and do more design and estimating, but not procuring, our estimates get more accurate. But of course, we face this challenge that as each month goes by, certain things get more expensive. And the vendors are only willing to hold their pricing for 30 days. And so the RFPs we've just got in on $3 million worth of equipment would have to go out for it again. And in 3 months' time, it would probably become 3.1 or 3.2. So we're in a conundrum here that the longer we hold off, the more accurate our numbers get, but it's a more accurate number that has risen. So a little bit of a catch-22, which is why the project team is sort of unanimous. We should go forward now. In terms of storing stuff, so the plan here is that the major equipment will be housed inside a large tent structure, similar to what you see down at the Island Timber Frame site and many other places. And we want to build that early on and put the equipment in that. Now, tents aren't totally secure, but it's we can lock the doors on the end walls to keep things secure. And one of the first things we'll be doing after we clear the site is putting up security fencing. And then when Maple Rind is set up, they will actually probably secure their own compound too. Nothing is bulletproof or break-in proof, but we're aware of those risks in the construction planning, and I've made it clear to them, vandalism and break-in is a risk, and Maple Rinders deal with that on all of their construction sites, and they'll have to do the same here. So we are thinking down those lines, but we think it'll be pretty close to, as the equipment gets received, we'll be ready to be installing it straight away. There won't be too much stuff sitting around for months on end. So does that answer the question?
Yep. I still have some concern about it, but it answers the question. Thanks.
I just want to say I have one of those tent things for my camper van, but I wouldn't trust it with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff. I think we have to be very quiet. Everybody has to be really quiet about when it
Hopefully
comes
it's a
to town.
bigger, more hardy tent.
Anyway.
Yeah.
It's, uh,
I've just turned my video off because I realised it's running slow. These industrial tents, the side walls are made of lock block concrete, and the end walls are hard walls. So the first 3 metre height is effectively like a building. So somebody would have to really work hard to break in. Not impossible, but a lot harder than what they've had to do to date at the treatment plant site.
Councillor Sullivan?
It's nice to see you again, Paul. I don't really have any questions either. I'm appreciative of your patient guidance through this whole process. And as far as the train leaving the station, I'm ready to go. I mean, let's just get this thing built. Let's finish this project. And I mean, the sooner we build stuff, the cheaper it is, right? So let's get on to it. Thanks, Paul.
Councillor Brown?
Okay. I'm wondering, there's in the spread, what page am I on? Page 217, in your chart there, you refer to a delay cost for maple reindeers, is how I pronounce them, because it's like Canadian reindeers. I'm now realizing that they're reindeers. It's a different thing. I thought it was a really cute name before, but I guess not. So I'm just wondering what that is. Is that just time, like lapsed time, or other costs that were regarding delay?
Yep. Thank you for the question. It's a good one. So what's happened here is we'd originally expected to be at the point of starting construction, like shovels in the ground, in August of last year. And all the things that happened last year have delayed us, one reason or another. And so for integrated sustainability as the designer, like any normal consulting company, it's the staff hours that go into it. For Maple Rinders, it's a bit different. It's actually more the calendar time. So they've had staff allocated to the project and they've been participating, but it's basically the start date has been pushed back a year, and it's possible the completion date might be pushed back even further. So they incur a cost for every month that the project is delayed. And it's unavoidable, and it's part of the contractual agreement. So that all of these design changes in delaying the start of construction for literally a year have cost us. And for Maple Rinders, it's every extra month there isn't much change out of $20,000, if any. And I think my estimate here for the whole project team, it's probably about a $50,000 per month overhead for the project now that we're fully established. So that's where it's at. If the project completion got delayed by another year because of other reasons, we'd be talking about a different delay cost again. But this is one for effectively delay that we already know has been incurred and planned for. So does that answer the question?
It does, thank you. And I'm fine with increasing the budget because I think you're right. We need to get the equipment. We might be waiting a really long time for that equipment, so let's get it ordered.
Okay. Councillor Sproul, did you have anything?
Not much to say. I'm just on page 209 when project funding sources.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. You'll have to speak closer to the microphone.
Getting a bit out of it. No, on page 209, the source of project funding sources. Under the little table, it says, there's an asterisk, and it says the borrowing amount approved in the 2018 referendum was for 4.4, but with the ICIP 1 funding, only 2.25 million is needed for the project. I'm just pointing it out as a bit of good news, I guess.
If I may burst that bubble just a little, I perhaps
some catch to this.
it probably would have been more accurate for me to say here that only 2.25 million is needed for phase 1. The remainder out of that 4.4 we've got allocated as part of the phase 2 project budget. So yeah, it is, the 4.4 million is fully allocated if we get our other funding and go ahead with both phase 1 and phase 2. So we'll end up using all of that borrowing capacity.
Oh, okay.
Bubble burst.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
just
Just
wanna
one
do
thing, Paul. I'm like Sean. I want to get moving. This has been going on for a long time, and yes, it's a lot of money, but it needs to be done. And the sooner we get started, the better off we are, because the longer we wait, the prices are going to go up. So, someone like to move the motions?
I'll move that council authorize the expenditure of the remaining $5,960,000 of the currently authorized project budget of $9.7 million for the wastewater upgrade project, and that council authorize an increase to the Maple Rinders contract by $5,960,000 from $1.7 million to $7,660,000 with to proceed with purchasing and construction of the wastewater upgrade project to the extent of the currently authorized budget.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. One last comment, Paul, is can we have a shovel ceremony down there now that the COVID is finished?
Not only can we have one, I think we're actually required to have one. Might be surprised to know that the provincial and federal politicians always want in on these things. We are going to have one, and the plan is to do that once the site is cleared and prepped and everything. Then we'll have an official sod turning ceremony. I don't think we want to do it before we clear the trees. Won't feel like very much. So yep, we're going to have one. And just a footnote for Councillor Brown. Maple Rinders is actually named after it's the family name of the family that founded the company. I'm not sure if there's any connection with reindeer at all, but lots of people make that mispronunciation.
No, we didn't. Seconded it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we voted.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Did we vote?
Thank you very much, Paul.
Now we're second guessing.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Paul.
Too.
Paul.
Thanks.
Paul.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Next, council members' monthly reports. I have a few that I would like to report on. Updates. The Comox Valley Family Recruitment and Retention Task Force. It was a very positive meeting and working together with the people that are at the table, and Dr. Jonathan Kerr is doing a very good job of organizing this and working on it. And we have agreed to have a welcome package for the Cumberland to attract doctors. And one of the stories they told was a doctor moved here because in his welcome package it talked about the Comox Fire Department, and that's why he chose to come here, was to get involved in the fire department. So you never know what is going to bring a doctor here and make them want to come and stay here. So it's really positive. We will be putting a package together and working with them. I was asked if I would go out and meet with the doctors if they flew in, and I said absolutely. All the mayors would do that and chair the regional district to make them welcome in the community. Some of them will come and stay with their families, and one of the suggestions was if they brought a camper, then they could stay at the lake park and get to really know the community. And I also talked to UROC, and they would provide trail rides to anyone that wanted to go. If the doctor and his family wanted to go up and ride the trails, that he would organize that. So there's a lot of buy-in from the residents about attracting doctors here, and there certainly is a need. So look forward to the next meeting. I did highlight that I met with Inspector Curvis, and it was a discussion after we didn't reach his targeted population of 5,000. He was a little disappointed, but we certainly weren't. And he talked about the process from now on would be, it's a 2-year process to negotiate so that we could be ready when we do hit the 5,000 in 5 years. And there's a lot of discussion that has to take place as the officers that came here to council stated that, and it's an agreement between the village, the RCMP, and the provincial government is what's all involved. So, but also in that discussion, we talked about the present police station in Courtenay, and that it's outdated. They are over capacity, and they need to look at a new site. And there had been a plan to put them up by the regional district office, but that site is now too small. And so I'm asking council, I've talked to Mayor Wells, and I've talked to Chair Kettler, and I've talked to Nicole Rempo, First Nations, about forming a task force to start the process of going to the provincial government and asking them, because they do this work, to find an alternate location and start that process. And if it would be the mayors going and lobbying the provincial government to get that process started. So if nobody has any objections, we're going to start that process. I think that, to me, the land is getting very costly, and if they're going to do something, they need to do it now. And what they do is they hire a consultant who comes up and looks at different locations and puts some reports together, and also what do they need in the way of office space and all the other things that go with an RCMP building. It's usually a very long process and takes quite a few years.
And then do they fund the building?
I didn't ask that question. I assumed that it would be part of the cost of paying for the policing. The provincial government does fund a lot of it, I think, but I'm not sure. But that's one of the things we will find out. Okay? This was just starting to see if there was interest in the valley.
Okay.
And I will talk to Mayor Arnott about that. Then had a meeting with Chris Johnson, Building Connections Project Coordinator for the Comox Valley, and she was looking for space to hold programs in the village, and I've connected her to Kevin McFedrin, our recreation staff person who's working with her now. In the coldest night of the year, I did walk with Rotary, and it was a very cold night and very wet night, and I don't think anybody got away without getting drenched. But they raised a lot of money, so look forward to them. I had a discussion with Jeffrey Von Wartberg from the Physical Education Leadership at the Cumberland Schools, and he was looking for projects for his leadership class, and so on village property. And so I contacted UROC, Lake Park Wilderness Society, the Recreation Department, and UROC got back and has set up looking at trail work for the leadership class. Very pleased to be working on it. I talked to Dougal, and very excited about it. I talked to Genevieve out at the Lake Park, and they're willing to do planting and painting and all kinds of things. The leadership class is going to be quite busy. Great support out there in the community. And the rest you can see, but it's been a very busy month. Any questions from anybody? And I don't highlight, I do put the report for Island Health, but I don't highlight it because it's old information now by the time it gets here. And so that I don't highlight it. But the last meeting we had with Island Health, there was myself and Mayor Andy Adams on the call. And Island Health was wondering if they should continue the meetings, and they're not going to. My recommendation is they have 4 meetings a year to talk to the mayors and chairs of the area, and they agreed that's what they're going to do it 4 times a year, because now that COVID is over, there's so many more topics that we could talk about and get them to understand how important these services are to our communities. So that's my report. Councillor Brown.
My report is not included in the agenda package, so I'll just submit it next. I did do it and submitted it, but it just is not here, so I'll do it
I
next
have
month.
it. I have February. Councillor Brown. Yeah,
Oh, it's
Yeah,
not
it's
in
in
my
here.
agenda package. Okay,
I don't have it either.
okay,
I have it.
awesome. Perhaps I'm using the wrong agenda
They
package.
put mine first, I think.
Yeah, it's not on the agenda I have in front of me, so that's okay. I can look it up. So,
Do you want?
no, I've got it here. Thanks. So, what do I want to talk about? I started the climate leadership course, started and finished the climate leadership course through FCM. It was super interesting. There were, I think, 60 of us that were accepted into the program. You had to choose one of 3 pathways. So I chose planning to implementation and got that one. It was super interesting. And if anybody's interested in, I think I did. I was going to put a link in there. But if anybody's interested in there's tons of resources that we got. So I'm happy to share those if anybody wants to, extra reading in your spare time. And Community Justice Center, Crown referrals. I guess CJC has been working on getting Crown referrals for a very long time, and the province has managed to sort that out. So we will now accept Crown referrals. There's no funding associated with it, which is unfortunate, but it's a good thing. And we're also looking into traffic referrals. And Coldest Night, I managed to raise $450, and I think our team raised, so just one of the teams that was in Cumberland, I can't remember, I think it was Team Cumberland, raised over $2,000. And the rest of it's there. And there was another, the Climate Caucus hosted a conversation about the new Watershed Security Fund, like 2 days after we talked about it here. And so I've sent the information from the webinar on to staff, which I think you guys were included from. It was interesting, just different perspectives on how we could make the fund, how we could give some input to make the fund really work well.
Thank you. And just congratulate the community justice, because that was one of the things that we were working on when I was there. Isn't it amazing how things are coming around? It's only taken how many years?
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Councillor Spruill. You were away on holidays.
And I want to. But it's nice to be back. There's lots of enjoying all of this. It's boring to be on holiday all the time.
Terribly boring.
Yes. Councillor Kettler.
Thanks. Yep, my report's there, and I think really what's of interest to the council is budgets at the regional district. So last year we did Rethink Comox Valley, where we basically asked most of our services to not do any increase and in fact try and look for savings in some of the services. This year we have some slight increases. So for both track and field and the rec complex service, we'll see a slight increase in requisition. We have the regional feasibility study service is a zero requisition because there's going to be a carry forward for that. The search and rescue service will see a slight decrease in requisition. However, they, as you know, are looking for a new building, which, to my knowledge, they have not found yet. So there likely is going to be a request to the region for help with finding them that new building. Then there's the emergency program, and Cumberland currently gets service through that program by contract. They've obviously had a lot of increase in work under the emergency program over the last few years. So the contracts will see a 17.8% increase. But there's also talk about having that service become a requisition for the contract participants, which are the municipalities at this time. The areas are currently part of a requisition service. The 9/11 answering service also will see a slight increase for 2022. And then the recreation grant service will see a slight increase, but Cumberland did benefit from many of the grants coming out of that service. UROC received $25,000. The Village of Cumberland itself received $4,000. Cumberland Lake Wilderness Society received $2,500, and the Coal Hills BMX Association received $1,500 for 2022.
What was the 4,000 for the village?
It's recreation, so I'm not sure. Maybe Michelle can explain.
It's actually been going on for quite a number of years now. They give us $4,000 towards subsidizing programs every single year, and I believe that's originally when the parent and taught became like by donation and that type of thing. So we've been using it that way.
Good. Okay. Nice. Anything else?
Yeah, just one last thing, that the Comox Valley Transit Service will see an increase of $300,000 for 2022. And any questions? Yes.
I'm interested in the ship breaking. Can you
Yeah.
tell us about that?
So
Shut down?
yeah, well, so what happened was there was activity within Area A that the regional district didn't think was conducive with the zoning. And so first it was decided at the electoral areas that they agreed with staff's interpretation of the zoning, that ship breaking wasn't included within that zone. And then that went to the board, and we also certified staff's recommendation that that the zoning was, they were not compliant within the zoning. And so we are now seeking an injunction.
Okay, so there's no opportunity for them to like apply, well, they wouldn't get it anyway if they applied to rezone it.
So we had given them the opportunity to do a temporary use permit, which they did not apply for, or apply for a rezoning.
Okay.
So they haven't taken action to do either one of those, and the activities are continuing, so that's why we had to seek injunction. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good luck with that.
Finished?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. Last month was a little lighter for me. Both the solid waste board and the hospital board were cancelled. We are doing such a great job that I'm sure got it all finished. No, I'm sure they're saving up some awesome stuff for the next couple meetings. So I just had the regular special council or council meetings and special council meetings. I will say just to your report that the hospital board definitely for the longest time has really been advocating for Island Health and more communication, and it's definitely been coming on more, it seems like that. But every other meetings we're talking about it and more advocacy and stuff like that. So.
Well, one of the points I've stressed is that they need to let the mayors know that if they can't come, they should send an alternate. And maybe it's not the mayor. Maybe in some areas they appoint somebody to healthcare, and so maybe it's that person that should be sitting at the table for those Zoom conference meetings. Yeah. So anyway, they will be sending out a letter to everyone. Okay. Can I have a motion to receive, please?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. No new business, notice, motions, and announcements. Recreation, Culture, and Arts Master Plan. Survey launch March 14th, open for community input until April the 11th, 2022. Community engagement Wednesday, March 16th, 2022, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock at Buchanan Hall, the lower level of the Culture Center at 2675 Dunsmuir, and Village Hall meeting Monday, March 21st at 10 a.m. in Buchanan Hall, and that's in person. Question period. We are now open for question period. If you have a question, please send your question to email at info@cumberland.ca using subject line question period. Please note your questions will only come forward and comments will not be read. So how's everybody, already?
Nope, no questions
okay.
yet.
So how's everybody feeling about the no mask?
It's weird.
It's my N95.
I was at a show in Victoria on Friday with no masks, sold out show and full dancing, and it was fantastic. And everybody there had the best time I've ever seen anybody have.
I bet.
I
It
know.
was quite celebratory. There was a 20s or like 1920s vibe going on. Like, yeah, freedom at last.
It was time for everybody. It certainly was.
Yeah, I enjoyed the show at the Masonic Lodge on Friday. Did dancing there. It was really nice to have that activity again.
Yes, there's lots of things that are going to happen now, and it's so nice not to. Although a couple of times I went to get mine to put it on, and it's like, no, don't need that anymore.
I went to the Access Center and everybody had one on. So I went back to the car and got one. Like, okay, well,
Yes.
I don't know what's going on here, but
Yeah.
just going to do what everyone else does. Same with Costco. I went in and everybody at the getting in there at entry was all masked up. And then halfway through, half the people don't have them. So it was,
Yeah.
I think there'll be a bit of time where
Yeah.
people are adjusting like habit.
yeah.
Like, I'm not sure I'll go to the grocery store without my mask just yet.
Well, and I don't know if I was
I
so
don't know.
bold to just be the only one at the Access Center.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on,
Yeah.
people. It's like, let's
Yeah.
stick to the corner with my mask.
I've been going grocery shopping, and it's so nice to see in the grocery stores, it's all back to normal. All the lines are taken down, all the arrows are gone. It's really nice. And a lot of people are not wearing, but it's nice to see the courtesy come back and the smiles from people.
Hopefully personal space will also be respected a little bit more in our
I
society.
think,
Who knows?
yeah,
That
I
might be
think
good.
if I see somebody wear a mask, I walk to the side. I don't go up to them.
I'd like to think just in general, across
Yes.
the board, people stop bunching in so much. Who knows? Probably not.
Well, I really hope that people that are sick, or feel sick, that they don't come to work. And they, if it's members of council, that you zoom in, because it's proven that we need to stop it and not carry it around for everybody to get. So do we have anything yet?
We have no questions tonight.
Oh, good. So we'll have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. All in favor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening.